I'd like to now introduce our esteemed panel, all of whom have been thinking a lot about this topic, and I'm super excited to learn from them today. The first is Jim Bologna. He's a GOA faculty and the Senior Director of Innovation and Technology at the Windward School in California, United States. We have Sophia D., a student from Frankfurt International School, a GOA member school in Germany. We also have Tricia Friedman. I'm messing up, I apologize. We have Tricia Friedman, the founder and education leader of AlliedEd.org and Shifting Schools. And finally, Dr. Kenny Graves, the Director of Studies and Assistant Principal at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to take my screen share off so I can see you all. So, panelists, we're here to discuss assessment and specifically rethinking assessment in light of artificial intelligence. Something I'm particularly excited and nervous about at the same time. I wanted to lean into the excitement piece and hear from each of you what you are most excited about when it comes to this advancement. Jim, can we start with you?
Sure. Thank you very much. It's so excited to be here. And I will say, like, I'm super excited about how much, artificial intelligence, but obviously I think the big word has been ChatGPT, how much that's elevated conversations around computer science, sort of in the public view. That's my short-term super excited version of that. But I think longer term, I think there's a better view of the promise of personalized learning, which is really what I think we're clearly on the path to that, and that makes me very excited.
Sophia.
Yes, I actually can just only agree to that, because I think with ChatGPT coming out, it's such a great opportunity for many students, especially students that have specific learning disadvantages or challenges, to just kind of have this tool as like an interactive tool to also use to benefit themselves. Because I know a lot of friends who've actually been really enjoying ChatGPT specifically for recording data in relation to summarizing long paragraphs of text into like shorter paragraphs. So I'm excited for that.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for being here. Tricia.
I am really excited to see the way that this has sparked what I am referring to as an information literacy renaissance. Just seeing folks get really curious about, okay, these answers, we get it that, if we're talking about ChatGPT, it's scraping all of this data, all of this language from social media, which social media apps, you can go in and ask ChatGPT that. And I think it's just really a great nudge for us as practitioners to think about what is it that we believe about assessment and how does that pair with what we're saying the purpose of education is at large. I think that conversation that I'm hearing so many educators have about why do we do assessment? What has the student experience with assessment been? And let's look at our school's mission statement. Are these things in alignment or not? And I just think it's a really critical conversation. So I'm glad to hear it.
Thank you so much. As a former history teacher, I like what you're saying about the information literacy. And I was seeing that Bing Chat was citing its sources. And I was like, oh my gosh, citing its sources is going to have a moment now. And then I looked and the sources weren't great. And I was talking to Lene on our staff and she said, yeah, that's citing the wrong sources. I'm like, what a great exercise that I probably would have never imagined. Thank you so much. And Kenny.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here and have a conversation about this. I think there's two things that this phenomenon really excites me. The first is getting back to the basics of teaching practice, right? And I can say that oddly, where I think getting back to what formative assessment means, right? Getting back to revisiting some of those old prompts that we've had in our file cabinets and our computers for 15 years that we've been giving over and over and over again. Right? It gives us real opportunity to revisit what we've done in the past and revamp it, given this new technology. And also, I think, as Jim said, it gives us an opportunity to examine technology as a discipline, right? This is not the first time where a technology has interrupted our work, right? And so where does this moment sit, for example, when the calculator was introduced, right? Or when the smartboard was introduced in our classroom, right? It gives us a context and a way of thinking to have with our students that we haven't really had before, right? Wikipedia, yeah, I see someone there, right? It really allows us to have more generative conversations about technology as a discipline to study, not just something that we use. In addition, what ethics come along with that? What are some of the ethical considerations? How does this really go with our opportunities to really think about inclusion in our schools? Like, it really gives us an opportunity to dissect all of those things with our students.
I'm so glad you mentioned ethical considerations. We've started off with all the exciting things, and I think now it's important to talk about sort of what are some of the considerations, maybe not what gives us pause, maybe what gives us pause, but what are, how are you thinking about the ethical considerations, the rules or parameters around the responsible use of AI when it comes to teaching and learning? Where's the middle ground here between those who are worried about compliance and honor systems and those eager to jump in and leverage it completely? What thoughts do you have, Tricia, on the ethics of this?
This sort of brings me to, before we started the recording, I mentioned that I was so happy that there's a student on this panel, because I think when we're having these conversations, their voices really matter. And I don't know, Kenny, you were mentioning like this hasn't been the first ed tech disruption. It most certainly won't be the last. And I think this is an opportunity for us to also be remembering this is about them, this involves them. And a leader whose work means a lot to me, Adrienne Marie Brown, their book, Emergent Strategy, if you're in school leadership, great book. They talk about how we have to, and this is sort of a direct quote, move at the speed of trust. So I think this is yet another opportunity for us in the world of education to be seeing what is our trust capacity like, because when we're going through these ethical considerations, are we listening to students? Early on, there were a few districts and schools who were saying, we're going to ban it. And then, if students want to use it, they can use it at home. There's a lot of assumptions baked into that, right? Does that student have quality internet at home? Do they have the time capacity to support? And do we really want them to be using this tool on their own in the first place? So I think ethical considerations, we have to explore them. I don't know that we did a great job of doing that when social media was first on the rise. And here's an opportunity, I think, for us to learn from history a little bit. But we've got to ask questions, and we have to include students in the asking of these questions, because generative AI tools are going to shape a whole wide variety of industries. Forbes magazine just published an article saying basically by 2025, every organization is going to be using generative AI. So to what extent do we need to make sure that students understand what generative AI is, the opportunities as well as its limitations, and how can we make sure that we're talking with them, not just about them?
I love that. And I'm so glad we have Sophia here. And so let's put her on the spot. How do you respond to that? And I guess, what do you think of when you hear sort of the banning of these technologies or some of these decisions being made largely absent of the student voice?
Well, I personally think from a student perspective that AI is going to follow us into our future no matter what. It's kind of an inevitable topic, so to speak, and something that I would like to highlight. I think it's a lot about the teachers or the professors' attitude surrounding ChatGPT, because if you ban it, or if you ban any form of AI platform or generator, you always will have access in some form or another. And so I think it's a lot about the teacher's attitude. Are they using it to encourage students to use it for mundane tasks like gathering information? Or are they actually like, what is their attitude about it? Because I think once teachers see it as like, no, like you don't use this whatsoever, then kind of a lot of like topics and like conversations come up surrounding, okay, what is our opinion towards this now? And so I would highly encourage all the teachers out there to kind of highlight the advantages of ChatGPT. So for example, or any AI platform, for example, is it helping me in my learning? Is it giving me advantages that's able to support my learning and my study habits and stuff, while still also remaining or reminding of the ethical considerations behind it? Because I think only when we address it on a personal level and see when it's the teacher and the student working collaboratively, then I think that this kind of tool, which can become very much an ethical issue in relation to plagiarism or whatnot, then I think the conversations are more open, and also those conversations are able to happen in the first place.
Great, thank you. Jim.
Can I jump in? Yeah, I was going
Please.
to. I loved that, Sophia. Thank you. That actually echoes a lot of what like our early teachers. We happen to be really lucky in that when we had an in-service scheduled for January, so we kind of rolled off the break into a discussion around ChatGPT. And of course, you know, whole first conversations or concerns, I'd say top level concerns just surface were around plagiarism and, you know, how was this going to be used, and were students going to be, you know, misrepresenting the information they got, you know, and just taking it at gospel. And I think we really had once that first version of that passed, I think we had some really great conversations around, you know, digital literacy. And this is really just an extension of, you know, the teaching and learning that is happening anyway in the classroom. So you've got a different platform, and it actually might let you go a little bit deeper or start at a different place in the conversation around it. But it's still a conversation about the validity of sources and the usefulness of this particular tool, and where is it leaving you, and then where are you going to take it from there. I don't think any school has a mission that says we need to teach the way we did in, you know, 1850. So, you know, it's a continual evolvement, and, you know, leaning back on the mission, saying this is how we're going to take this next tool, you know, forward into the classroom. I think is really, like, that's the best conversation around, you know, the next steps for that.
I would also love to chime in again, if I may.
Sure.
Sorry. I think it's also because I was having this conversation with my psychology teacher, and since I'm taking the IB curriculum, there's certain things, because we were playing around with ChatGPT just for her to see, like, look, you are able to use it for these type of things when it comes to this and this, but these are these are the limits where it's not able to happen. And something what I really appreciated, which I also encourage other teachers to kind of do, is show the limits behind it, in the sense that when you would ask ChatGPT, for example, to put in a question for psychology, analyze this case study and this case study, it will give you a format, but it's important to remind everyone and ourselves also that it's incomplete. For example, it's not the structure that specific curriculums want, and it's not entailing keywords that you need in order for this essay to be successful. So I think addressing, and for teachers to also be like, hey, this is what you can do if you use it, but please be reminded that this is also what's going to come out. So it's kind of also a warning to students to remember that you will, no matter what, have to put in the effort for this essay or whatever it is to be fully complete and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you for adding that on. And I think we're finding this, there's the education piece, or the learning together piece. It has to do with the application of the technology to learning itself, but also the ethical consideration of when it's okay to learn. And Dr. Kenny, I'm wondering if there's anything there that you all have thought of, or you've been thinking of, when it comes to guiding students or working with students, not just about using AI, like we use Google as a skill, but the ethics of using, when to use, how to use, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be honest, students have been, you know, cheating since the dawn of time, right? Or we've been using shortcuts since the dawn of time, right? So, you know, it's not, but also, like, I think we need to reframe, you know, when we had a meeting, a faculty meeting, and we brought up ChatGPT, right? Many teachers were concerned about academic integrity. And one of the questions I asked them is, are we worried about cheating, or are we actually worried about how we're supporting our students through the writing process, right? What is more important to us, catching students or actually giving them the tools they need to prevent some of these things from happening? So how can we use ChatGPT in our corner to help us have those generative conversations, as opposed to just a list of rules and honor code and academic integrity policy, and we simply just read that to our students and have them sign it and go about their way, right? So some of the things that we've actually done is ChatGPT is terrible at citations, right? So that's the first thing that our teachers really did was they co-developed per department an activity, particularly in the humanities, for example, and in science, around putting in a topic in ChatGPT and then actually teaching the mechanics of citation, right? And how do you include quotes? How do you cite paraphrasing? How do you use certain formats in order to anchor that information in facts and knowledge, right? And citations. That's the first thing that we did, is that as a department, we had the departments kind of coalesce and create a lesson plan around that. We also did spot the misinformation, right? So we had students put in a prompt, teachers would put in a prompt, something would come out, and then we would have the students actually go through and spot the misinformation. The other part that I think is important here is to make sure that students understand the mechanics of how ChatGPT works. And that helps them when they are thinking about this as academic integrity. So one of the things we said was, in academic integrity, it's all about using someone else's words and not citing them as your own, or not citing them, right? And ChatGPT is that. It's not a Google database, right? It is actually using millions upon millions of other people's words to generate, right, this response, right? And so having them just understand the mechanics of how it actually works and how it connects to this very idea around academic integrity and using someone else's words without citing them is an important educational moment for them, just so that they can connect how the generative AI works and how your academic integrity policy is written. So those are, maybe a few things that we've done really practically to help students in terms of sort of this ethical boundary that we're trying to have them navigate with AI and how they complete their academic work.
I love that, Dr. Graves. I just wanted to add on to that, because another great conversation that I think it flips the perspective is, ChatGPT can also, again, there's that, just because it can, should it can be used to assess student work. So having that conversations with students around, what is your take on your assessment being judged, assessed by generative AI? And a lot of students will say, like, well, I don't like that. Okay, let's talk more. Why? Because the reality is, folks, let me know in the chat, those of you who might, maybe you're a specialist teacher and you literally have hundreds of students. Are you more consistent if you are marking hours and hours and hours and hours? Or might the AI be able to be more consistent? So I think there's some really interesting conversations to be had, just kind of doing a 180 on that and looking at ChatGPT as assessor, as feedback tool, if we're thinking about assessment from that way. Again, Sophia, I'd be curious for your thoughts on that. As an IB student where your teachers have a lot of assessments to mark, what would your take be if your teacher is saying to you, actually, your TOK essay, we're going to have ChatGPT work on giving you some feedback?
Sarah, thank you so much. So there, I would definitely say that for some, it depends again on the assignment. For some things, I do think that it's actually beneficial to be like, here, this is the level of your work, this is where you could improve and stuff. And then also, it's important to remember that those things that you kind of get generated from ChatGPT specifically is not going to fulfill fully the criteria, for example, the course or whatnot and stuff. So it is interesting. And it also makes you aware as a student that you are leaving a footprint, by using this tool, you're leaving a footprint on like social media and on like these online platforms. And that's where you also kind of come into like thinking like, oh, do I really want to, put all of this out there, and do I not want to? So I do think that in specific times, it's, valuable for specific things, but overall, I think it's also definitely important to question that. And I would also love to kind of evaluate something else, specifically surrounding like the ethical considerations. Something that I was also talking with another teacher about was that actually you're able to see the history on ChatGPT. So let's say there is some form of like the teacher is questioning whether or not this is you because you've had, these essays that you've written in class, and then, you're writing this piece that you took home and stuff, and it's like really weird. So you're actually able to show your ChatGPT history and stuff. So I think for teachers, that's also, valuable to remember that if you are concerned that some students are, using that tool, you can always ask them to show it. And also, with teachers being like, okay, this tool is accessible, but I can always still come and check your, what you're doing and stuff. That also is for the students specifically, like a warning, like, oh, okay, I want to make sure that, no matter what I do, I want to keep my history clean in that sense.
Tricia, I want to go back to you. At the very beginning of this conversation, you touched on something that I think is really important, and I think that's been missed often when it comes to new technologies in education in particular, and that has to do with equity and access considerations. So what are some of the equity and access considerations that every teacher and school leader need to be taking into account, or we need to do a better job with, I think, than as a community we've done in the past?
I think first and foremost, sometimes I hear this misconception, and like Sophia, I'd be interested in your thoughts again after this, that, oh, well, teenagers just, they know how to use technology, right? They are digital citizens just because they are 15, 16, 17 years old. They know how to use these tools, which it's not, at least in my experience, always been correct. So I think sometimes, we say, here's the keys, go drive this, without having those conversations again around what are some of the privacy concerns? How does ChatGPT work? Who are OpenAI? What have they said their charter statement is? Why is it important for us to look at things like terms of service? I know that the TOS, terms of service, that's not super sexy, right? Like, many of us sign up for tools without looking at it. And I think, again, like I was saying, this is a moment for an information literacy renaissance, right? To what extent are we doing ourselves a massive disservice if we don't know who's on the board for tools like this? ChatGPT had more folks sign up for it. Again, quote, fix this if this is wrong, but it was like 1 million people within 48 hours or something absolutely ridiculous, right? Who owns it? Who helped develop it? That's really important. There's a popular quote that's often attributed to the sci-fi author William Gibson, that the future is already here. It's just not been evenly distributed. So again, I think if we're not having all of these conversations with students where they're aware of how this works, who's built it, what the limitations are, if you notice bias, do you know what to do? I shared in the chat earlier, there is an email address. You can do this as an exercise with students too. You're noticing bias or you're noticing incorrect information. Let's reach out. Like, let's create a list, and maybe as a class, like, we're doing a bi-weekly report back to them in terms of what we're noticing. A test that I do sometimes with groups, and again, school leaders who are here, go to ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT, what are the 5 most important books that a school leader in K-12 education should read? Most of the time, and I've done this with lots and lots of different groups, the list comes back. The 5 books all come from white, male, cis, heterosexual authors. Is that problematic? What is ChatGPT basing that on? And then we'll have a conversation around, well, what are the best books? Well, how does that get decided? And how would AI decide that? So again, I kind of feel like I went on a few different curves there, but I hope there was something of an answer in there for you.
Absolutely. I think mentioning, the equitability of even access to education and knowledge about the project. You mentioned privacy, access to the technology itself. I think there's a lot of different ways to take the equity and access question. Kenny, what do you think about this, or what thoughts have you guys considered?
I think this is something that I truly care about. I actually teach a course in ethics and technology at my school. Right. And one of the first things we sort of did was the European Commission has released an amazing report in regards to ethical issues surrounding AI, and really gives a lot of guiding questions for educators. One of the things that I think that, as Tricia said, has brought up that we don't talk a lot about is the bias in how is the information that ChatGPT, the bias that is baked into it, right? I sort of see, ChatGPT and generative AI as sort of like really robust chatbots, right? And there's been a lot written about bias in chatbots, right? Including Tay, I think it was the famous chatbot that was taught to be racist, sexist, etc. Right? And if you're using this type of information, right, and students are using it, who is moderating it? How transparent are these companies and how they are culling information in terms of how are they looking for bias, how they're looking for discrimination, how they're looking for certain words or phrases that are incorrect or biased towards certain groups. And then who determines whether or not that is bias or not, right? Those are really important questions. Another thing that I think is that I'm thinking about in particular is the human rights aspect, for example. So, you know, and we're thinking about exploitation and labor issues and using users as free labor to build the product, right? And what area, how do we have conversations with our students about that, about how sometimes tech companies will use various groups of people to kind of experiment on, quote unquote, and what impact has that had for them in the future, right? And again, with data, and that links directly to data, right? Like we're collecting all of this data on many of our students. And in what way does that impact them later on, right? With the privacy policies and how they're sharing them with third-party vendors, right? How might that impact them in the future in ways that they don't know about? So, you know, the European Commission has really done an excellent job in that. And I can put the link in the chat to that article. And it really gives a phenomenal overview of some of the questions that educators can look at when it comes to ethical issues, particularly with the use of AI in the classroom.
Thank you. Jim.
Thanks. Actually, just tagging off of what Kenny was just saying, I think the OpenAI has been, since we're still, since we're talking about the AI and the fundamental biases that are kind of baked in, a lot of that first, it comes from all of the data that goes through, because basically these models are all trained to be looking at patterns in the data itself, and those patterns are based off of the data that's being fed to it. We know that ChatGPT or OpenAI is adjusting the bias there, but in the shift from 3 to 4, they've also, there's been the announcement with Microsoft, and so a lot of the tinkering that's happening behind the scenes is now being a little bit more obscured, which is part of what it makes sense in terms of from a company's perspective, in that they want to, they need to keep their own proprietary information, but that also should be a flag to folks that there's a lot of things that are happening and we don't necessarily know. We know it's somewhat better, but we don't know exactly what's going on, and we don't know if what concerns are being addressed and which ones can't be addressed yet with everything.
You all have touched on this in different ways, but I want to come back to it really concretely. And that's, how should we be thinking about assessment now? Just thinking really clearly about assessment. If you put yourselves in the shoes of a teacher, educator, or a school leader, how should we be thinking about assessment as we see these really, really fast evolution of AI? And particularly for school leaders, what are the ways that we can balance honoring some of the fears surrounding AI without giving up on the opportunity that's there? And again, specifically thinking about assessment and feedback, really. Kenny, do you want to start us off?
Sure. As a school leader, I really resonate with sort of that balance of fear of what's going to happen and how we move forward. And that's why at the beginning, I'm really excited about getting back to the basics, right? One of the areas that as a school leader, right, I'm really focusing in with teachers is the idea around formative assessment, right? And it is crucial, I think, in terms of really kind of counteracting the fear we have that students can just turn in a final product, right, that might be used by ChatGPT or some of these generative AIs, and we haven't had any understanding of how they got to that conclusion or where they've come from and how we actually assess how they got there. So focusing on those intermediate steps are super important, right, in order to gain knowledge about where students are in particular aspects of their learning process, and how is it that I can help them, get to the last point in a way that they're not only maybe using a tool like ChatGPT to help them, but not just taking what the output is of ChatGPT and trying to represent that as they're learning. And so, for example, right, many of the students that I work with in my school, they have learning differences, right? And so sometimes it's really hard to start an essay, right? We don't know how to start it. It's really difficult they maybe have processing issues, or they just have writer's block. They get writer paralysis, right? In terms of trying to put something down on the paper. And so what I know that many of our educators have started to do was maybe use ChatGPT as that starting point, right? Let's just put in a couple of things just to get us started, just so that we can see how an essay is structured, or just to give us a little bit of an idea of where to start or where not to start is also an important part here. And so leveraging it as a formative assessment tool, AI, will not only help teachers kind of gauge where students are, but it could actually help them get started in better ways than they have before. Instead of necessarily pulling out the graphic organizers. I was an English teacher by trade, right? For example, so when I was teaching writing, you pull out the graphic organizers, you have the chart, right? And you're giving evidence and things like that. Maybe ChatGPT can help, streamline some of that by giving us an already kind of half-baked essay, and let's reverse engineer it and figure out, how do we make this better? How do we include more evidence? What about voice? How is that important to an essay? All of those are formative assessment techniques that a teacher can use and can leverage ChatGPT to maybe give us a different approach to writing in this era where students can simply type in a prompt and get an essay. How can we use it to help support that writing process along the way?
Thank you so much for what you said and what you said before too about going back to the basics. It reminded me, it was not unlike the conversations that I heard around GOA when it first started about the changes of online learning and what that would be. And I think we really tried to focus teachers who came to us to teach for GOA on saying, like, get back to the basics and think about, what do you really want? What's your true objective here? And how do we break that down? And when you focus in on that, the mode of delivery or the tool itself, it slowly fades from the conversation and then rises back up as a supporting tool, just as you mentioned a second ago. So I really appreciate that.
And Lucas, one more thing, like also reemphasizing with the students that, just like anything, I can go, I read a blog that said, look, you can go to the store and get a blanket, or you can learn how to crochet it yourself. Like, what is the beauty of learning to crochet it yourself as opposed to just going and buying something, right? Leading in that way and helping students understand why it's important to have a process is crucial, right? Giving them the reasoning why, as opposed to just giving them a paper and just telling them to do it. I'd love to hear Sophia too. What about that process? Like, how to use, what is the joy in the process versus just having an outcome that you just kind of turn in?
I'm really glad you mentioned that. So I couldn't agree more in that sense, because I think that one of the benefits, again, like we were highlighting throughout this webinar, is that you can use it for your advantage to show essay structures and stuff. And something that I would also like to kind of, I guess, link that in is that I think schools should highlight the interplay between both, take home essays, where you could have the potential to like use ChatGPT in order to help you structure something, or just, get inspiration flowing in some sense, and also essays within class. So I don't know if I wouldn't classify this as a solution of any sort, but I would maybe suggest that teachers could do an approach of doing both in-class essays and take-home essays, because something that I do think, I wouldn't prefer one over the other, because I think it's unrealistic from teachers' point of view to kind of, spend, these class times, which you have so limited of, maybe 2 class times to just write this in-class essay of some sort, without also, remembering to not strip away that feeling of comfort from writing an essay at home for many of the students as well. So something that I would suggest is to also, have an essay that you can take home and kind of use ChatGPT just to like look at your outline and maybe then work off of that, use that for your benefit. And then also in class, and something that this kind of links back to our ethical, discussion. Do you want to, rely so much on ChatGPT that when you come in for these in-class essays, you have no clue what, you're doing? And do you really want to put that much value and that much pressure onto yourself for that, case? And I think when teachers highlight that, yeah, we're going to be having in-class essays as well as essays at home, that also it motivates a student to kind of see like, okay, I need to be able to work on my fundamental, for example, essay outline, if we're focusing on English, like the English specific course, I have my introduction, how am I going to structure this and that. And something that, to link by what you're saying is to maybe also, you can build an outline at home, use ChatGPT to kind of get your inspiration flowing, depicting what do I like, what do I don't like, what can I improve on, to kind of build that habit of being able to improve upon something rather than, not doing something at all. And then taking that into class when you write your essay. And yeah.
Sophia, I'm so glad you're here and sharing all this great wisdom. Tricia or Jim, how should we be thinking or rethinking assessment? Is changing? What's changing?
I'll jump in. We've been talking about the essay a lot. And again, I think it's an opportunity for us to think, what is the point of the essay? What are the skills that go into writing an effective essay? Why is it that the essay has survived as an assessment piece for so long? And is it time for us to think about multimodal essays, essays that have images, that have sketch notes, that have video, that have text types that, I'm going to upset some people, are a little more relevant today? So again, is assessment actually driving learning that's relevant, that has real relevance in our students' life? If it doesn't, is it time for us to evolve a little bit? And I know that many of us, our school curriculum might tie us to certain practices, but this is, I think, a really great moment for us to say, look, we have this tool that is enabling us to do things differently, and it's going to get better and better. I mean, folks have been talking about ChatGPT 4 in the chat. We're not talking about a year later, we're talking about a few weeks later, and this tool has already gotten better, right? So that rate of change is going to improve. So I think we really need to step back and say, if this is how we are assessing learning, why are we doing it that way? Is this truly what's best for today's learners? Have we talked to them about it? Have we asked students, what is it that you feel like you're actually learning when you're writing an essay? What is it that you feel like you're actually learning when you're asked to be a part of a panel? And then also remembering, ChatGPT, it doesn't have access to information from 2023. So if we are still tied to the essay, what can we be doing to say, let's make this hyper contextual to today, right? Let's make sure that maybe it's even hyper localized. Are we asking students, if we're still tied to the essay, are we writing essays where you've got to get out into your community and speak to people, and that part of the process is going to be documented? I think a lot about, does assessment place too much emphasis on product and not process? Again, what are the inherent values in our assessment practices? Are we saying, doesn't matter how you got there, just hand this thing in, versus does assessment truly measure learning, and does it provoke future learning?
I would love to chime in as well. Something that I really, really enjoyed that you were saying is also not just focusing on essay writing, but also other ways you can measure learning. I think, especially because there's so many different types of students out there that prefer so many different things, whether they're visual learners or, like to write essays and stuff. I think we're playing then in that sense to their strengths, rather than prioritizing one type of learner over the other. So I definitely agree, being able to have a well-rounded variety of assessment types you can also do.
And the computer science teacher in me needs to jump in and just give an alternative, because we've got lots of English examples. But one of the things that is also like part of the OpenAI structure is this API connection, which is this back-end access. And generally, they'll make that available. They'll make their new tool available first through the API, and then they'll build something like, adding Instruct GPT onto it to make ChatGPT. So that OpenAI component of it, the API component, has been connected to some of the tools that I use with my students for teaching programming. And that was something that showed up, towards the end of the fall, and like before the ChatGPT even hit the scene, there was the option in one of our tools to have GPT take a look at the code and then come back and give you some suggestions. And so once that happened, we took a class and worked out like, how useful is this? What is it really telling you? Where are the downfalls and the pitfalls with this? And now it's part of our formative process, like as Kenny was saying, like this is the early on section. You're coding this, you're having a problem. It's not going to be able to tell you a high level issue, but it's certainly going to tell you if you've got a parenthesis in the wrong place, or you've missed that dangling semicolon. That's a problem. So it's really, really helpful to sort of quickly elevate through the nuts and bolts stuff and get to the heart of the assessment component.
Jim, thanks so much for balancing that out and talking about the formative ways it can help in CS in particular. I think it's brilliant. And Tricia, I want to say I thought it was interesting. You mentioned that you preemptively said, I'm going to upset some people with this, and then shared about multimodal essays. And I saw in the chat, yes. But I know you've probably heard the other side too. And I think that maybe that's a great lesson for school leaders who are thinking about how to navigate this, to let the yeses run a little bit with it and provide sort of your front runner experience and share with some of those who maybe are more resistant to see both the good and the bad that comes out of multimodal. I think we saw that with like laptops for students, use of the internet. Like we had these people on the front end of it start to do assessments that people maybe were hesitant to at first, but there was some excitement around, but then became, oh my gosh, like there's some real value in a multimodal essay. Look at this student who's engaged who maybe wasn't before, and et cetera. And so I think it was a nice way to sort of play out maybe some of the balance that leaders may be facing here. We want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I have a couple more questions. I want to do a quick hitter. Just quickly, something that teachers or leaders could try tomorrow. Quick hitter tomorrow to rethink assessment in the light of AI, not redoing the curriculum, not totally rethinking, but is there something that concretely they could implement tomorrow to dip their toes in?
Great. Can I jump in real quick? So perfect example of something like that for me, pick a difficult concept in your course. For me, I'm teaching principles, and DNS is always a challenge for students. So very specifically, one of the things I did first early on with ChatGPT was say, explain how DNS works from the browser all the way through to the endpoint. Once it generated that first topic, I came back and said, okay, now explain it to me at this grade level, and this grade level. Give me 3 different versions of this at varying levels. And then now we can have a conversation about that in the classroom around what resonates, where are we missing some of the pieces.
Tricia.
It's really interesting. I, with school leaders specifically, have been doing some work around, let's ask ChatGPT to write a mission statement, or you've just recently done some work with your DEIJ policy. Let's see what ChatGPT puts out. Does that generic document echo what you've created as a leadership team? And is that good or not good? Let's ask ChatGPT to change that in the style of. Folks that have been playing around with ChatGPT, this is a really popular prompt for people to ask, rewrite it in the style of. Let's ask ChatGPT, which authors' styles can you mimic really well? And, you really kind of have to like argue a little bit back and forth with ChatGPT to get it to eventually admit, like, I can't do all of the authors. It's also really hard for me to imitate, but here are some writers that I can do really well. What do you notice about that those lists of authors? So I think, again, just some of the work that maybe your school has done, a recent document that you've produced, or a newsletter that you put out to your parent caretaker audience. Let's put it in there, or give that topic to ChatGPT, ask it to crank something out, do that comparison, ask it to maybe make it more readable for a 3rd grader. ask it to make it more engaging and just look at what are the suggestions? Why is it doing that? And might this make us better communicators? Does it affirm the work of communication that we're doing already?
Sophia.
So from the teacher's perspective, I would like to maybe encourage also just for tomorrow, go into your classroom and ask like your students, hey, like, what do you think our classroom is going to feel most comfortable with? Because, every classroom is different and they have a variety of amazing individuals within, like, do we have a class that will prefer to do this type of thing more over this type of thing more? And again, it's important to remember to keep a balance of everything, but just going in, and just being open about the conversation, being able to say like, hey, like this is the problem, but I still want to encourage and engage you guys in the solution of this problem. Like, do you think we should maybe for next time do an in-class, and the next time I'll give you guys the opportunity to do a video presentation of some sort for the knowledge we've kind of collected within like throughout the years and stuff. So.
Thank you, Kenny.
An exercise that I would bring immediately is reverse engineering. Is ask, if you're an English teacher, ask the ChatGPT, put on a prompt, get an essay, have the kids work on it, to work on citations, work on voice, work on, look at what ChatGPT is good at and what it's not good at. I've had a math teacher, we were doing sort of a data science-y type of unit and asked it to produce code to count variety of different demographics, but then have a deeper conversation about what is missing in this code that ChatGPT, looked at or produced. Does it allow us to capture multiple gender, race, ethnicity, right? Giving more critical questions about data. I've also had teachers write their narrative home reports that they write about students and comments. And having a conversation about the language we use to describe our students, right? What is actually the language we're using is it productive? Are we using gendered language in the way that we're describing student performance? Are we actually talking about their performance? Having ChatGPT and even doing narrative comments that teachers write and having ChatGPT do that, having a generative conversation about how we talk about our students in our written reports is another really fantastic reverse engineering activity. So reverse engineering, I do it all day, every day with ChatGPT in order to give students a real sense of problem solving and dissecting and identifying this information.
Thank you all so much for those practical examples. I think the do nows are really important, especially when everything seems so overwhelming. Any last thoughts or additional things that are coming to mind, follow-ups that you'd like to share? All right. Well, again, I appreciate you all for coming. I'm going to quickly share my screen because I'd be remiss if I didn't share an opportunity for you all to continue this conversation with GOA. Registration for our Learning Summit 2023 Designing for Agency is now open. It's June 26th to 29th, just outside of Washington, D.C. at Episcopal High School. The GOA Learning Summit is going to offer both classroom educators and school leaders the chance to address recent developments in AI and to learn key research and practice related to student agency. Most of all, as is always a hallmark of GOA professional learning, there'll be plenty of time to apply, plan, and design for taking action within your schools or organizations. So some specific workshops that are already planning, redesigning assessments with AI and agency in mind, and AI in the future of schools leading communities through change. So do go to globalonlineacademy.org/learning-summit to learn more. We hope to see you there. I will be there. I hope to see you there and continue this conversation then. Thanks again to all the panelists, all of the people who participated, watched, who are watching this recording later. We truly appreciate it. And from all of us here at GOA, we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.